Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Adam and Eve. Use the link in the description and code MIDNIGHT to get 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. So, there's a lot of podcasts out there where cast members from a fondly remembered TV show will go through it episode by episode and talk about their experiences, from The Office to West Wing and many more. Nothing against those shows, but for me, the Always Sunny podcast really towers above the rest. You're getting funny on-set stories, sure, but you're also hearing from the creators of the show itself. Friends who have known each other for decades, and writers of the vast majority of Always Sunny episodes. Plus Megan Gans, a very funny producer on the podcast, and someone with a lot of great sitcom episodes under her belt as well. But maybe the most interesting thing that sets this podcast apart is that the actual show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is still being made. In a lot of the recent podcasts, we've been hearing about the production of season 16, and sometimes it's pretty clear that there's been some friendly creative tension about the direction of the season. In a holiday livestream, Rob McElhenney vented a bit about his differences with Charlie Day, which gave us this really interesting exchange.
Let's go back to the show being 4-3 versus 16 by 9.
I think it looks better before.
Okay, so what you wanted to do, just so the audience knows, someone came to us and said, hey,
I remember
the world is changing.
I remember this.
Your television show is in 4-3. And Charlie was saying, no, the show must be this aspect ratio. And we were going,
I think it would be rad if the show was still in 4:3.
I think.
But.
and standard definition.
Also,
which is what you fought for.
Yeah.
You were saying the show should
look the grittier look to the.
So a 4-3 aspect ratio with a standard definition.
4:3, obviously, yes. The technology all changed. Everyone's TVs changed, so you have to change.
Well, of course, but you resisted that for a very long time.
That's true.
People support you, Charlie, in the chat.
Yeah, they like 4:3.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, 4:3 was the standard definition aspect ratio that television used for decades before eventually migrating over to 16:9 thanks to high definition. In Always Sunny's case, the switch was made at the start of season 6 back in 2010. And I gotta say, I agree with Charlie Day here. I enjoy plenty of the seasons made after season 6, but the standard definition, non-widescreen look suited the sensibilities of the show perfectly, and it's always something I'll miss when watching more recent episodes. And It's Always Sunny is far from the only show I'd say that about. In my last video about Netflix's struggle making sitcoms, I mentioned how they bought the rights to Seinfeld for $500 million. One thing I cut out of that script was a short rant about how Netflix didn't even let you watch the show in 4:3, unlike The Simpsons on Disney+, which at least added that option eventually. On Netflix, Seinfeld is just unavailable to stream in the way that it was originally shot and viewed. I mean, who would need it? After all, isn't high-definition widescreen viewing preferable in every possible situation? Well, here's the thing. I think the answer is no. Now, okay, obviously for the majority of things that you're going to want to watch on a TV, widescreen and HD is going to be the clear choice. I'm not going to sit here and clamor for a show like Game of Thrones to look more like an episode of Frasier, even if deep down I maybe want to a little bit. Look, we would have gotten a much better final season if the showrunners weren't so obsessed with large-scale spectacle. I'm just saying. Anyway, we've gotten to the point where it feels like the strengths of old standard definition television are completely ignored. Netflix, and really the streaming industry as a whole, seem to view 4:3 as kind of an embarrassment, a low-value last resort for old shows that no one wants to pony up to remaster. Now, many of those remasters are done with great care and attention, like the ones for The Wire and The Sopranos, and some are done so horribly that they cause an uproar in the fan base, like the atrocious Buffy the Vampire Slayer remaster from the mid-2010s. But one question I don't think gets considered often enough is, will a remaster actually help the show? In many cases, the answer is yes, but it seems to be taken as a given that a cleaner image quality in a widescreen presentation is always an upgrade, and for some shows, I just don't think that's the case. Now, the main genre I would point to here is the sitcom, specifically live-action sitcoms and especially multicam sitcoms. Not just Seinfeld, but Friends, Cheers, Taxi, WKRP in Cincinnati, and so many more. It's clear watching these shows that they were designed from the ground up with standard definition television in mind. Not just in their aspect ratios, but in everything. The sets tend to be fairly simple and uncluttered. The cinematography is more focused on making sure the actors' performances are well framed than doing anything overly original with the camera work. Though they will occasionally get really visually inventive for a gag here or there. In short, they look like sitcoms. They weren't lazily designed, they were just designed to push to the forefront the strengths of the show, the performances, and the dialogue. Their simple sets weren't some mistake, they were a smart way to handle the fact that many viewers were watching over weak antennas or had small televisions. I think this is often seen as a shortcoming on TV's part. In fact, the medium in general seems to have this inferiority complex when compared to film. I've said this before, but showrunners of modern streaming shows will often take every opportunity they can to swear up and down that their show is cinematic. It's not normal TV, it's really an 8-hour movie. And for many shows, having that cinematic quality is great. I mean, I can't imagine Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul without their particular visual styles. And there absolutely needs to be shows that are pushing TV forward with great cinematography. But this one-size-fits-all move to 16:9 just wasn't well suited for every show. Seinfeld in 16:9 looks off. Its sets are often a little too simplistic to hold up to scrutiny. Its heavy makeup may be a bit too obvious. Many viewers watching it for the first time will probably view that as a fault of the show, but it isn't. It's just the result of the fact that Seinfeld was literally never meant to be seen this way. But now, not only is that the primary way we're watching it, it's presented as if that's the obviously superior option, and no other is even necessary. But I don't think this is a problem confined to shows from the 20th century. Look at a lot of the more traditional sitcoms of the past decade or so. Not just multicam, but even many single cam ones. I enjoyed New Girl quite a bit, but I'm not sure I'll ever be convinced that being in widescreen did this show about roommates hanging out any favors. While the widescreen format existed before the 50s and 60s, it was really those 2 decades that saw movie studios and filmmakers really embrace it, in part because they wanted the big screen experience to stand apart from television. Then, decades later, we asked a show like New Girl, which is about as sitcom-y as a sitcom gets without being a multicam show with a live audience, to use an aspect ratio that's closer to Lawrence of Arabia's than I Love Lucy's. I think that's kind of ridiculous. I get that this is determined more by what viewers will be watching it on than anything else. HD TVs, laptops, and phones, more than any artistic consideration. But ultimately, I do think it did a disservice to the material, which would have been better suited to 4x3 and the more intimate, small-scale presentation that it provides. So often, the TV industry treats itself as film's embarrassing little brother, always lagging behind and willing to toss aside anything it had been doing in pursuit of film's grander scale and prestige. And yes, obviously the two mediums have a lot in common, but there's another medium in TV's DNA that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough: radio. Many of television's earliest hits can trace their roots back to broadcast radio. One of the longest running dramas in TV history, Gunsmoke, was a radio show for 9 years before moving to TV. Soap operas like Guiding Light, which began on the radio in 1937, went on to run on TV for decades. And of course, sitcoms like I Love Lucy, which started as the hit radio comedy My Favorite Husband. It's easy to dismiss the influence of radio on television as some weird, short growing pain that the medium went through in its early days. But if you love old radio dramas, and as you might be able to tell from my channel, I do, it's pretty clear just how long of a lasting influence it really had. The barroom banter of Cheers isn't all that far off from the rat-a-tat dialogue of an Abbott and Costello radio broadcast, or even the sardonic wit of the Sam Spade mystery shows. I don't think these roots are something that TV creators need to disavow or run away from. Radio, like TV, met its audience in their homes. There's a sense of friendly warmth and comfortable familiarity that it shares with television, and I think that's something that can and should be embraced when the show is right for it, especially when we're talking about dialogue and performance-driven sitcoms. A boxier aspect ratio isn't inherently worse than a widescreen one. To many, that will sound stupidly obvious. I mean, film has known this for years, even after it fell in love with widescreen. We don't have to mention classic movies from the 40s or anything. More recent films like Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse or Paul Schrader's First Reformed have used a boxier aspect ratio to great effect. When asked about his choice to shoot the Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe film this way, Eggers said, "It's a fantastic aspect ratio for close-ups. Why would you want a room on either side of the frame interfering with two of the greatest faces and four of the finest cheekbones that have ever been born?" The TV sitcom, meanwhile, hasn't really re-embraced those strengths much at all, but they've tried to make do. I don't think it's a coincidence that mockumentary sitcoms exploded in popularity around the same time as the switch to HD TVs. This faux documentary format allowed shows like The Office, Parks and Rec, and Modern Family, workplace and family sitcoms, to feel small and intimate again. With their talking head interviews and zoom-ins, they're able to recapture some of the feel of the old format while being, at least at the time, distinct and unique on television. I don't want anyone to walk away from this video thinking that I want to put like Atlanta or Severance in a 4:3 aspect ratio. My intention here is not to say that we should all throw out our HD televisions and demand that TV only be shot like it was in 1995. And I know that many viewers would now get annoyed at the black bars at the side of their screens, an issue that wasn't there with older TVs and 4:3. But there are modern movie directors willing to take that risk because their film is better suited for it, and I wish I could say the same thing for television sitcoms. In that podcast clip, Charlie Day said that he still prefers how those early Sunny seasons look, but technology demanded that they move on. And, he was right. But this isn't 2010 anymore. HD TVs aren't some novelty that everyone wants to show off, they're just the boring norm. We don't have to keep pretending that 16:9 is the end-all be-all of aspect ratios that every show needs to be in. So here's hoping that someday the television industry is able to appreciate its own past a little more.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.